Hello, Telvani here, and since I've had quite a few people asking for it, I decided I should probably release a quick video explaining the transition from Cold Spectral Helix to Trinity Lightning Strike. I'd like to preface this by saying, this is a two-part guide explaining how to transition from Cold Dagger to Trinity Claw Spectral Helix, and then from Spectral Helix to Lightning Strike. The result is not an ultra endgame setup, but rather where you can expect to be shortly after switching to Lightning Strike. I'll include a few POBs in the description below, so you can have an idea of what the build should look like at each step of the way. I'll also include what my current build looks like, and I'll probably include a POB to give you an idea of what some dream gear would look like. But, if you would take a second to like this video, it would mean a lot, as I do take a significant time out of my League Start progression to share these with you. Alright, so let's get into it. The first important thing you're going to want to do is get a decent claw, and switch from the White Wind setup to a Trinity setup. You can even do this while you're still running Spectral Helix, although I would make all the changes in the POB I've shown using your gear and stats, and double check that to do so is a damage increase. If it is not, the claw you're looking at buying probably isn't good enough. Ideally, you're going to want an Imperial Claw. For your prefixes, you want 3 of the following: local added cold damage, local added lightning damage, local added fire damage, or attacks with this weapon penetrate % of elemental resistances. For your suffixes, you will want attack speed, crit chance, and crit multi. But it is early league, so you can settle for any high elemental DPS claw you can get your hands on. I'd recommend at least 450 elemental DPS if the claw has penetration on it, or at least 550 elemental DPS if the claw does not. Also, make sure the claw has plus life gained for each enemy hit by attacks as it's implicit, as we really want life gained on hit to help supplement our life gain when the new monsters decide to disable our leech. Next, we're going to need to swap out a few gems. So swap out Cold Penetration from the starter build to Trinity, and make sure to mark it at 50 resonance in the calcs over here. We are also going to be swapping out Hatred for either Wrath or Anger, since Hatred increases cold damage, and we will no longer be dealing exclusively cold damage. Anger and Wrath, on the other hand, give flat added fire or lightning damage respectively. You'll have to decide on which aura to use based on your needs for Trinity support. If you come to the Calcs tab here, you'll want to make sure that your highest damage type's lowest damage roll is lower than your second highest damage type's highest damage. If this isn't the case, you won't be able to activate Trinity. Our last skill gem swap will be to remove the Creeping Frost Bone Chill setup and start using a 4-link totem setup instead. This is just for quality of life on the totem, since Creeping Frost is no longer worth casting, as it only buffs cold damage and we are now dealing a mix of elements. The links for that totem setup are as follows: Ancestral Protector, multiple totems, life gained on hit, and Culling Strike, as we are losing Culling Strike from our dagger masteries, which I'll go over right now. So we'll want to change a few of our skill points around. Since we are no longer using a dagger, we'll swap out of these dagger nodes here and pick up these claw nodes instead. We will keep these dagger nodes, however, since they increase our elusive effect and give us access to more crit multi with elusive through a mastery. Next, you'll need to spec out of these cold damage nodes down here, since we are not dealing exclusively cold damage. These skill points can now be spent anywhere that add damage. Retaliation down here is pretty strong, and so is Primeval Force. And there we go. We fully transitioned the build from Cold Daggers to Trinity Claw. Now that we are using a claw setup, you'll want to farm out some currency for upgrades before you can transition further over to Lightning Strike, as there are 4 main things that we need to get a hold of gear-wise. First, we'll want to get 30% ailment avoidance on our shield, without giving up an important stat like life or spell suppression. This will allow us to drop the 3-step assault boots and start running Darkrai Vectors, which are the second item we need to acquire, as these boots are almost a 10% damage increase. Thirdly, we'll need a pair of gloves with the Searing Exarch implicit strike skills target 1 additional enemy. This is pretty important for strike skills, otherwise they just don't feel good. And finally, keeping that in mind, we will need to be able to afford a gold, silver, and opalescent oil for the Amulet Anointment Tribal Fury for a second additional strike. In the very end game, you can forego this anointment, but only once you have acquired +2 strikes on your gloves. But that is a tier 2 Eldritch implicit, which requires a lot of RNG with Orbs of Conflict, and is not readily available or affordable early on. Once you have these 4 upgrades, you are now ready to transition to Lightning Strike. So go ahead and swap out your Spectral Helix gem for Vol Lightning Strike at this point. Do make sure it is a Vol version of the gem, as without the Vol skill, I don't think Lightning Strike is worth running. It just gives you too much burst damage, which is very helpful for bosses and the new Uber Essence bosses and maps. Ideally, you'll want the anomalous version of the skill for Pierce, but if not, we can solve that on the tree or on gear. The other skill gem change you'll want to do at this point is swap out the life gained on hit gem from your totem setup with Ancestral Warchief. Because you are using multiple totems, you'll be able to summon one of each. Ancestral Warchief only increases melee damage, which is why we weren't running it with Spectral Helix. With those 2 gem swaps out of the way, let's move on to our skill tree. Ideally at this point, you'll have enough strength, intelligence, and mana that you can drop these 2 nodes for a few extra skill points. And since we no longer care about avoiding projectile speed, you can go ahead and reconnect the tree here. We will also need to pick up Pierce over here if you don't have an anomalous version of Vol Lightning Strike. Alternatively, you could get +1 Pierce and Eldritch Implicits and craft Pierce on your helmet or gloves with a Veiled Crafting mod. Or you could even use the Pierce helmet enchant for Lightning Strike. All of these would be better options than going on the tree, but early on you may need to. Next, if you can afford the skill points, this node is pretty nice up here, as it gives melee strike range, which makes it feel a little better to play. And the ultimate goal is the path over here to grab Fortify. It's not that much extra damage, but 17 Fortification is 17% less damage taken, which is pretty powerful. Another thing you should grab is Point Blank, as our projectiles should be hitting the boss at melee distance. Finally, if you've managed to pick up a little extra spell suppression on your gear, you could probably drop this wheel here and pick up this wheel instead, saving you another 2 skill points. And there you have it, a step-by-step guide on how to transition your Spectral Helix Raider over to Lightning Strike. I'll probably make another video in the future about min-maxing Omni Lightning Strike. However, Omniscience is 20x in climbing, and I've got a lot of farming to do before I'd be ready to showcase anything like that. Anyway, thank you for watching, good luck with your league, and I'll see you in the next one.